I had just moved to Florida a few weeks ago when Hurricane Irma started to brew. The warm, sunny skies turned ominous, and people around me buzzed with fear. They urged everyone to evacuate, panic spilling from their voices. But I thought, what's the worst that could happen? I didn't know anyone in town, and the idea of bothering my family, reaching out to them to voice my worries, felt silly. I've never been really close to my family, so I guess to me that's not something that I would think of doing anyway. So I decided to ride it out alone. As the storm hit, the wind howled like a beast outside, shaking my little house. The trees bent and swayed, their branches clawing at the sky. Rain pounded on the roof like 1,000 drums, drenching everything in its path. Soon, I watched nervously as the water began to creep into my living room, invading my space like an unwelcome guest. Panic set in. I knew I had to make a plan. I rushed to grab some wood and nails from the garage, my heart racing as I thought about what could happen next. With trembling hands, I boarded up my bedroom door, hoping to find safety in that small space, just to ride out the storm there. I locked myself in, feeling like I was in a fortress, but the truth was, it felt more like a prison. The hours dragged on as I listened to the storm rage outside, each crash of thunder making my heart race faster. I could hear branches snapping and things crashing against the walls. I kept telling myself it would be over soon. I just needed to make it through the night. Eventually, exhaustion crept in. I fell asleep, still scared, still alone, hoping that morning would bring calm. When I finally woke up, the house was eerily quiet. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the dread that settled in my chest. I mustered the courage to check what was happening downstairs. Slowly, I crept down the stairs, one careful step at a time, bracing myself for whatever I might find. The water was still there, but then something floating caught my eye. My heart dropped, and I froze on the step. A body floated in my living room. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My knees turned to jelly, and a wave of shock washed over me. I stumbled back, my throat tightening as tears streamed down my face. Fear wrapped around me like a dark cloak, suffocating and cold. I had to call for help. Trembling, I dialed 911, my hands shaking so hard I nearly dropped the phone. There's a person in my house," I managed to choke out, my mind racing with terrifying thoughts. But just as I tried to explain, the call kept dropping, the signal failing over and over, each attempt a reminder of my isolation. Hours felt like days, stretched into a blur of fear and disbelief. I couldn't help but imagine what had happened to the person lying in my living room. Had they been trapped? Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I heard distant sirens cut through the silence. Hope flared within me, making my heart race in a different way. Rescuers arrived and I was ushered out of the house, leaving the nightmare behind. Beneath the chaos and noise, I could still hear my heart pounding. I was saved, but I would walk away with scars that would never fade. The image of that lifeless body stayed etched in my mind, a haunting reminder of horror and loss. I left Florida that very day, having learned in the most brutal way that sometimes facing your fears means knowing when to seek shelter. The thought of another hurricane made my skin crawl, and I knew I would never look back. This happened a few years back. I honestly still can't believe that this happened, but unfortunately, people will be people, no matter what the circumstances are. The storm started quietly, just a heavy rain at first, but soon, Hurricane Sandy roared to life. I was alone in my beach house, huddled with only a candle flickering beside me. The wind howled like a wild animal, shaking the walls and making me feel small. As the power went out, the world turned dark and cold. I could hear the waves crashing against the shore, louder than ever. It was terrifying, but I tried to keep calm. I had made my way to the basement, thinking it was the safest place. But soon, I could feel the water rising around me. Panic set in. I decided to climb up to the second floor, away from the flooding. I found a spot by the window, hoping to see some sign that help was near. That's when I noticed the strange green flashes outside. They lit up the night like fireflies, but they weren't beautiful. I realized they were power transformers exploding, each bang echoing like thunder. Sleep found me eventually, maybe just for 2 hours. But then I woke up to a noise. It sounded like voices, a mix of shouting and laughter. My heart raced. Were they here to help me? The thought of rescue filled me with hope, and I made my way slowly down to the first floor. When I got to the living room, my heart sank. Two men in masks were rummaging through my things. I couldn't believe my eyes. Anger surged through me. "What are you doing?" I shouted, my voice stronger than I felt. They turned, surprise etched across their faces. "Oh, we didn't know you were here. We're here to help," one of them said, but their eyes told a different story. "Help? By going through my stuff?" I demanded. They exchanged a quick glance, realization hitting them that they'd been caught. Without a word, they bolted out of my flooded house, leaving me standing there in shock. I felt sick. My home was already a wreck, and now two men thought it was okay to take advantage of that. It was one of the scariest moments of my life, and I was left alone once more, with the storm still raging and trust shattered. I didn't bother calling the cops. I felt hopeless already, so what was that going to really do? It just sucks that there's really people like that. I still remember that day like it was yesterday. We had been warned about the hurricane, and everyone talked about the dangers of staying. But my family felt safe in our home, and I guess I thought it would just be a big storm that would pass us by. After all, I liked the rain. When the storm finally hit, we all huddled in the basement together. My younger sister was curled up next to me, clutching her favorite stuffed animal. It was dark down there, with just the flickering light of a single candle. Outside, the wind howled, and I could hear sirens wailing in the distance. Then came the sounds of debris hitting our windows, a deafening crack that made my heart race. We had a small window in the basement, a thick piece of glass that offered a blurry view of the chaos outside. I crept closer to it. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It felt like an adventure at first, but every gust of wind made my stomach twist a little more. As the hours passed, we began to notice something alarming. Water started creeping into the basement. It was cold, and soon enough, it was lapping at our feet. Panic struck my heart. My parents exchanged worried glances, but they tried to stay calm for my sister and me. I couldn't shake off the dread that filled the tiny space. Then, without warning, there was a thunderous bang from upstairs that made us all jump. "What was that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the storm's roar. I felt like I had to see what was happening. I carefully approached the little window and peered through. What I saw broke my heart. My bed, my sister's bunk bed, was floating down the street, dislodged from our home. In that heart-stopping moment, I felt a wave of despair wash over me. I turned to my family, my eyes wide with fear. "Mom! Dad! Look!" I pointed, but my voice quivered. My parents exchanged horrified looks before breaking down. My sister began to cry, and I felt helpless. Everything I had known was changing. I felt like I was in a nightmare, and I couldn't wake up. I kept hoping the floor wouldn't give way beneath us, but thankfully it didn't. Another hour passed, and the water rose to our knees. I started to think we'd be stuck there forever, but then the storm began to calm, and it felt surreal to hear silence after such chaos. When we finally mustered the courage to go upstairs, what we found was devastating. Our house, once filled with laughter and love, was now a wreck. Everything was soaked, piled high with debris. The living room was unrecognizable, and everything we cherished seemed ruined. Our neighbors were all outside too, looking just as lost as we were. It was like a scene from a movie, but it was real, and the weight of it crushed me. In the days that followed, we began to pick up the pieces. It was astonishing to see how tragedy like this brought people together. Neighbors who barely spoke before were suddenly lending a hand. We all worked hard to clean up the mess and help each other, but there was still this lingering sorrow. To this day, whenever I think back to my bed floating down the street, I feel a pang of sadness. It shouldn't have been out there, lost in a storm that changed everything.